The familiar scent of freshly cut grass and my dad's strong black coffee hung in the air. It was a perfect Saturday morning. I'd driven down the night before to spend the weekend with him, a rare break from the controlled chaos of my life at Fort Bragg. My dad, Marcus Miller, was a man carved from oaken principle. 20 years in the Army, a tour in Desert Storm, and a lifetime of quiet dignity had settled into his bones. His retirement consisted of three things: his garden, his model airplanes, and the meticulous upkeep of the small suburban house he'd bought with his VA loan. It was his slice of the American dream, earned in blood and sweat. He was sitting on the back porch, humming a tune by the Temptations, when the sound shattered our peace. It wasn't a knock. It was a pounding, a deep, percussive boom, 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 that rattled the decorative plate on the wall next to the door. It was the kind of knock that didn't ask for entry. It demanded it. My dad, with the ingrained reaction of a man used to authority, set his coffee down and started to rise. "What in the world?" "Stay put, Dad. I'll get it," I said, my voice low. My own internal alarms were blaring. I'm a captain in the U.S. Army's JAG Corps. I deal with conflict for a living, and that sound wasn't friendly. It was aggressive. It was an attempt at intimidation. I moved to the front of the house, my easygoing weekend demeanor evaporating, replaced by the cool, analytical focus I used in the courtroom. I glanced through the peephole and my eyebrows shot up. Two men stood on the porch. They were both white, clad in navy blue polo shirts with some kind of cheap embroidered shield emblem on the chest that read, "Crestwood Meadows Community Safety." One was built like a refrigerator, with a buzz cut and a vacant expression. The other was wiry, with a clipboard clutched in his hand like a scepter and a mustache that looked like it was trying to escape his face. They were wearing tactical-style pants and heavy boots, and on their belts were what looked like holsters, though I couldn't see what was in them. They looked like a low-budget cop show's idea of authority. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and opened the door. I didn't open it all the way, just enough to block the entrance with my body. I'm not a small man, 6'2" and in military shape, and I made sure to fill the space. "Can I help you?" I asked. My tone was neutral, devoid of emotion. The wiry one, clipboard, puffed out his chest. "We're here about a code violation, sir. Are you the homeowner?" "I'm his son. What's the problem?" He craned his neck to look past me, at my father's flagpole. Dad had installed it himself last year. It was a 20-foot pole, sunk in concrete from which a pristine American flag flew proudly. It was his pride and joy. "The flagpole," clipboard said, tapping his pen on the board. "It's in violation of Bylaw 17C, subsection 4, unauthorized structures. We've had a complaint." "A complaint from who?" "That's confidential," he snapped, his voice oozing a kind of manufactured authority. "We're with the HOA's Code Enforcement Division. We need you to take it down." Behind me, I heard my dad's voice, calm but with an edge of steel. "The hell I will." He'd come up behind me, and was now standing in the entryway, his arms crossed. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was insulted. Deeply. Clipboard's eyes flicked to my dad, a smirk playing on his lips. This was the reaction he wanted. He was looking for a fight. "Sir, I'm afraid it's not a request. This is your final warning. The pole comes down today, or we'll remove it for you and bill you for the service, along with a $500 fine. May I see your identification?" I asked, my voice still perfectly level. The man, clearly annoyed at being redirected back to me, fumbled in his pocket and produced a laminated card. It identified him as Senior Enforcement Officer Henderson. His partner, the refrigerator, just grunted and stared. They weren't cops. They weren't even licensed security. They were just two guys on a power trip, hired by a bunch of busybodies on an HOA board. "Mr. Henderson," I said, handing the card back, "under what legal authority are you operating? Are you a sworn peace officer of this state?" Henderson faltered for a second. "We are deputized by the Crestwood Meadows Homeowners Association to enforce the community bylaws, which you agreed to when you bought the house." "That's a civil agreement," I replied, my legal training kicking in automatically. "It doesn't grant you the authority to impersonate law enforcement or to seize private property without a court order. That flagpole is on my father's property. The flag itself is a protected symbol." My dad added, his voice low and rumbling, "I fought for that flag. It's not coming down because of some busybody's complaint." Henderson's face was turning a blotchy red. He was losing control, and he knew it. He had come here expecting to bully an old man, not to get into a legal debate. He looked at his silent partner, then back at me. His eyes were cold. "Look, smartass," he hissed, dropping the professional charade. We're not here to debate the law with you. We're here to do a job. You can take the pole down, or we can. It's your choice." He took a step forward, trying to use his presence to intimidate us. It was a critical miscalculation. I didn't move a muscle. I simply held my ground. "You will not be taking one more step onto this property," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You have no legal right to be here without the homeowner's consent, which you do not have. I'm telling you, as a final courtesy, to leave." Henderson laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Or what? You'll call the cops? We are the cops here, buddy." He gestured to his partner. "Stokes, get the bolt cutters from the truck. This gentleman wants to do things the hard way." The big man, Stokes, turned and started lumbering towards a white pickup truck parked at the curb. The words, "Community Safety," emblazoned on the side. Henderson stood there, a triumphant, venomous look on his face. He actually believed he had won. He thought he held all the cards. He had no idea what he had just walked into. I let out a slow breath, the kind I take before a cross-examination. I looked Henderson directly in the eye, letting the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You really don't want him to get those cutters," I said softly. "It's too late for that," Henderson sneered, puffing his chest out. "You should have complied." "No," I said, a cold, hard smile touching my lips for the first time. "I mean you, personally, do not want your man to attempt to dismantle my father's property, because the moment he does, this stops being a civil matter." Henderson squinted, confused. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I reached into my back pocket slowly and pulled out my wallet. I didn't flash it. I opened it deliberately and plucked out a single crisp white card. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger, just inches from his face. "It means," I said, my voice as sharp and clear as a gavel strike, "that you are currently attempting to commit felony property damage and trespassing while impersonating an officer of the peace in the presence of a commissioned officer of the United States Armed Forces. My name is Captain David Miller. I'm a lawyer with the Judge Advocate General's Corps. And you, Mr. Henderson, have just become the star witness in the easiest civil rights lawsuit I will ever have the pleasure of filing." His face went from flushed red to ghost white in a heartbeat. "Now I suggest you call your man off before this gets a whole lot worse for you." For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Henderson just stared at my ID. His brain seemed to be buffering, trying to process the information that had just short-circuited his entire power trip. The sneer was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. The refrigerator, Stokes, had stopped halfway back to the porch, the massive pair of red-handled bolt cutters looking like a toy in his meaty hands. He looked from me to Henderson, a flicker of confusion in his dull eyes. He was the muscle, not the brains, and the brains had just blue-screened. Henderson finally found his voice, but it was a reedy, pathetic version of his earlier bluster. That's not real. You can't be." I didn't answer. I just held the card steady, my gaze unwavering. The silence was my answer. It spoke volumes more than any protestation could. I let him stew in it, let him connect the dots. The calm demeanor, the precise language, the refusal to be intimidated. It was all starting to make a terrible kind of sense to him. "You're lying," he sputtered, trying to regain his footing. "You probably bought that online. Impersonating a military officer. That's a federal crime, buddy." I allowed myself a small, humorless smile. "It is. It's called stolen valor. And I'd be more than happy to discuss it, along with your own violations under 18 U.S. Code, paragraph 912, which covers impersonating an officer of the United States with the actual authorities. But right now, we're discussing your attempted felony criminal mischief and trespassing. So for the last time, call off your man and leave my father's property." I finally lowered my ID and slid it back into my wallet, the gesture a clear sign that the negotiation phase was over. Behind me, my dad spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. "Son," he said, and I knew he was speaking as much to Henderson as to me. "When I raised that flag, it was for every soldier who didn't come home to a house like this. It was for every man and woman who signed a blank check to this country, payable with their lives. I don't fly it to annoy my neighbors. I fly it to remember, and no tin-pot HOA dictator is going to tell me I can't." The raw, unshakable conviction in my father's voice seemed to land on Henderson like a physical blow. He visibly deflated. The last remnants of his fake authority crumbled away, leaving behind a pathetic, angry little man in a cheap polo shirt. He shot a venomous glare, not at me, but at the house across the street. It was a 2-story colonial with perfectly manicured rose bushes and little decorative shutters. In the front window, a curtain twitched. I knew in that instant. The anonymous complaint. Henderson finally turned to his partner. "Stokes, put it away. We're leaving." His voice was a low growl of defeat. Stokes grunted, turned without a word, and tossed the bolt cutters into the bed of the pickup with a loud clang. Henderson pointed a trembling finger at me. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You haven't heard the last of the Crestwood Meadows HOA. We have rules, we have bylaws." "And I have the U.S. Constitution," I said coolly. "Bring your bylaws. I'll see you in court." He gave one last hateful look at the flagpole, then spun on his heel and stomped towards his truck. They got in, slammed the doors, and peeled away from the curb with a squeal of tires, leaving a cloud of exhaust and failure hanging in the quiet suburban air. My dad let out a long, slow breath. He walked past me and stood on the porch, looking at his flag rippling in the morning breeze. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you, David. I knew that law degree would come in handy for something more than getting you out of speeding tickets." I chuckled, the tension finally breaking. "Anytime, Dad." We stood there for a moment, a shared victory. It felt good. We had stood our ground. We had won. Or so I thought. That's when I saw her. A woman emerged from the house across the street, the one with the perfect roses. She was in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair and a face pinched into a permanent state of disapproval. She was holding a phone to her ear and staring directly at us, her expression a mask of outrage. This had to be Mrs. Davison, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood watch, and apparently the puppet master behind our little visit. "Looks like the complainant is making another call," I murmured to my dad. "Let her," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "What's she going to do? Complain that we didn't let her goons tear down our property?" But as I watched her, a knot began to tighten in my stomach. She wasn't just complaining. She was animated, gesticulating wildly, her voice carrying across the lawn in shrill, panicked tones. I couldn't make out the words, but I could read the performance. She was playing the victim. She was putting on a show. And then I heard it, faintly at first, then growing steadily louder. A sound that makes your heart beat a little faster no matter who you are. A siren, not one, but two. They were close, and they were getting closer. My dad and I exchanged a look, his of confusion, mine of dawning horror. I knew exactly what she had done. She hadn't called the HOA back. She had called 911, and she hadn't told them the truth. You don't get that kind of response for a flagpole dispute. Within seconds, 2 police cruisers came screaming around the corner, lights flashing, and screeched to a halt in front of our house, parking at an angle that effectively blocked us in. Doors flew open and 2 officers emerged, their hands immediately going to the holsters on their hips. They used their doors for cover, their expressions grim, their focus locked entirely on us. One of them, a thick-set officer with a mustache that dwarfed Henderson's, unclipped his radio. His voice boomed across the lawn, cold and official. "We received a 911 call about 2 men, one of them armed, making threats to a resident. I need you both to put your hands where I can see them. Now." The world seemed to slow down. The officer's voice echoed in the sudden, sharp silence, cutting through the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. "One of them armed." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a malicious complaint anymore. This was swatting. A deliberate, dangerous lie designed to provoke a potentially deadly response. Across the street, Mrs. Davison had her hand clasped over her mouth in a perfect pantomime of fear, her eyes wide as she watched the drama she had orchestrated unfold. She had escalated this from a petty neighborhood squabble to a life-or-death situation. My military training slammed into the forefront of my mind. Stay calm. De-escalate. Comply. "Dad," I said, my voice low but firm, not taking my eyes off the officers. "Do exactly as I do. No sudden moves." He nodded, his face a grim, stoic mask. He had faced down far worse than this in his life, but there was a new kind of dread in this situation. This wasn't a battlefield with clear enemies. This was his front lawn, and the men with the guns were supposed to be on his side. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my hands to shoulder height, palms open and facing forward. My dad mirrored the movement. "I am Captain David Miller, United States Army," I projected, my voice clear and steady, using the command tone that carries across a field or a courtroom. "This is my father, Sergeant First Class Marcus Miller, retired. We are unarmed. There has been a misunderstanding." The lead officer, the one with the mustache, didn't relax his stance. "I want you both to step off the porch, one at a time. Keep your hands visible. You first," he said, nodding at me. I took a slow step down onto the grass. then another, moving with a practiced economy of motion. I could feel the eyes of the entire neighborhood on us. Curtains were twitching in every window. This was our public shaming, courtesy of Mrs. Davison. The second officer, younger and leaner, kept his weapon trained on my father while his partner focused on me. "Turn around, slowly," Mustache commanded. I complied, turning to face my father's house. The humiliation was a bitter taste in my mouth. I could see my own reflection in the living room window, a man with his hands up, a suspect on his own family's property. "Interlace your fingers behind your head." I did as he asked. The rough scrape of a zip tie bit into my wrists, pulled tight with a sharp, professional jerk. The officer patted me down, his hands quick and impersonal. He found my wallet and my phone. He pulled out the wallet, flipping through it. He paused when he got to my military ID. "Captain, huh?" he grunted, a note of skepticism in his voice. "JAG-Corps." He sounded unimpressed. He tossed the wallet onto the porch. Next, it was my dad's turn. Watching my father, a decorated veteran, a man who had served his country with honor for 2 decades, being forced to turn around and be zip-tied like a common criminal on his own property. It ignited a rage in me so pure and so hot it was hard to breathe. He endured it with a quiet, stony dignity that broke my heart. The younger officer spoke up. "Sir, we have to clear the house." "Go ahead," I said. "You'll find model airplanes and my father's Purple Heart. Nothing more." While the younger officer went inside, Mustache turned his attention to us. "So you want to tell me what this is about?" "We got a call from a woman over there." He gestured with his chin towards Mrs. Davison's house, saying you threatened her. "Said one of you lifted your shirt and showed her a gun." The lie was so audacious, so utterly fabricated, it took my breath away. "Officer, that is a complete and total falsehood," I said, my voice tight with controlled fury. "That woman made a false complaint to our HOA about my father's flagpole. When the 2 men she sent to tear it down were unsuccessful, it appears she called you and manufactured a story about a firearm. We have never spoken a word to her." He looked from me to my dad, then over at the flagpole, then back to the frantic-looking woman across the street. A flicker of something, maybe doubt, maybe just annoyance, crossed his face. He wasn't a fool. He was a cop who had responded to a man with a gun call, and the situation he found didn't quite line up. The scene wasn't frantic. We weren't agitated. We were a couple of guys in weekend clothes who looked more insulted than dangerous. The younger officer came back out. "House is clear, Sergeant. Nothing. No weapons in plain sight." The sergeant Mustache grunted. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, be advised, subjects are detained. No weapon found at this time. Send a car over to the complainant's address on Chestnut Lane. Get a formal statement." He turned back to us. His posture had relaxed slightly, but we were still in cuffs. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but a threat was made. I have to take this seriously." "You have a witness who is clearly lying," I shot back. "Where is the probable cause? You searched us, you searched the house. You found nothing. You're detaining 2 veterans, one of whom is an active duty officer, based on the word of a hysterical woman who has a clear and documented grudge against my father." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. He didn't like being questioned. "You can tell your story to the judge, Captain. For now, you're both being detained pending investigation." He grabbed my arm. "Let's go." As he led me towards his patrol car, I saw something that made the knot in my stomach twist even tighter. The white community safety pickup truck had returned. It was parked down the street. Henderson and Stokes were standing by it, watching the whole scene with smug satisfaction. Henderson caught my eye and gave me a slow, triumphant smile. This was their backup plan. This was their revenge. They couldn't win on the law, so they'd sick the police on us with a lie. They were putting us in the back of separate patrol cars when a sleek black sedan pulled up. It wasn't a police car. A woman in a sharp business suit got out, her expression a thundercloud of controlled fury. She was about my age, with a no-nonsense air that radiated authority. She strode directly towards the sergeant. "Sergeant Miller, I'm Jessica Riley, from the mayor's office. I got a call from your captain. What in God's name is going on here? We're getting calls from the Pentagon." The sergeant's jaw tightened. The words mayor's office and Pentagon had a sobering effect that my own military ID had failed to produce. He dropped his hand from my arm as if it were red hot and turned to face Ms. Riley, his whole demeanor shifting from assertive cop to a man suddenly on the defensive. "Ma'am, we're just responding to a 911 call," he said, his voice losing its hard edge. "Report of a man with a gun, making threats." Ms. Riley didn't even blink. Her eyes swept over the seen me and my father in zip ties, the flagpole standing untouched, and the smug duo of Henderson and Stokes watching from down the street. Her gaze finally landed on Mrs. Davison, who was now looking less like a terrified victim and more like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. "A report from whom?" Miss Priley asked, her voice dangerously soft. "From the woman over there who has a documented history of filing frivolous complaints? The same woman who, I'm willing to bet, is a close personal friend of Mr. Henderson, the head of that sham security force your department has received multiple complaints about for impersonating officers." The sergeant's face went pale. He knew he'd been played. He had walked into a trap, and now the mayor's office was involved. He looked over at Henderson, and the look he gave him could have curdled milk. Henderson's triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a dawning panic. He and Stokes started to slowly back away towards their truck, hoping to disappear. "Officer," Ms. Riley said, her voice like ice, "detain those two men. Now." The younger officer, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, didn't need to be told twice. He and the sergeant moved with surprising speed, intercepting Henderson and Stokes before they could make it to their vehicle. The tables had turned with breathtaking speed. "As for you, Sergeant," Ms. Riley continued, turning her attention back to him while his partner dealt with the fake cops, "I want these zip ties removed from Captain Miller and his father immediately. Then I want you to go get a statement from Mrs. Davison. A very, very thorough statement. Make sure you inform her of the penalties for filing a false police report and making a false 911 call, felonies that carry significant jail time." The sergeant, looking thoroughly chastened, fumbled for his tool and cut the ties from my wrists. Then my father's. He mumbled an apology that was barely audible. "We were just following procedure, sir." "Your procedure nearly got 2 innocent men killed," I said, rubbing my wrists. "You took the word of a single, hysterical caller over 2 men who were calm, compliant, and telling you the truth. You saw a black man, and you saw a uniform, and you made an assumption." He had the decency to look ashamed. He nodded, then went to do as Miss Riley had commanded, walking across the street with a heavy tread toward a now terrified-looking Mrs. Davison. Miss Riley turned to me. "Captain Miller, I'm so sorry. My office has been tracking this Crestwood Meadows HOA for months. There's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Bullying tactics, misappropriation of funds. This stunt is the nail in their coffin. When your CO called the base commander, who then called the congressman, who then called the mayor, well, things started happening fast." My dad stepped forward, his dignity fully restored. He extended a hand to her. "Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate the assist." She shook his hand warmly. "No, Sergeant. Thank you for your service. The last thing this city needs is for our veterans to be harassed on their own property for flying the flag they fought for." We watched as the police put Henderson and Stokes into the back of a squad car. Their pathetic community safety truck was being hooked up to a tow truck. Across the street, a weeping Mrs. Davison was being led out of her house, also in cuffs. The neighborhood spectacle had reached its grand finale, but the stars of the show had changed. The twitching curtains now belonged to an audience watching justice being served. In the end, it was a clean sweep. Henderson and Stokes were charged with impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy, and filing a false police report, as they had collaborated with Davison on the 911 call. Their community safety company was dissolved, and the HOA board that had hired them was facing a massive class action lawsuit from other residents they had bullied. Mrs. Davison, faced with the stark reality of felony charges, took a plea deal that involved a hefty fine, community service, and a mandatory restraining order to stay 500 feet away from my father and his property. She sold her house within 6 months. My father and I sat on his back porch the next morning, the sun warming our faces. The air was filled with the familiar smell of coffee and freshly cut grass. It was peaceful again, but it was a peace that felt more precious, more earned. The American flag waved proudly from its pole, a silent sentinel watching over the quiet street. "You know," my dad said, looking up at it. "For a minute there, I was worried." I took a sip of my coffee. "Only for a minute?" He chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "I've seen you in a courtroom, son. I knew you had it handled. I just didn't expect you to bring in the cavalry quite so fast." "Sometimes," I said with a smile, "it's not about winning the argument. It's about knowing who to call when the other side refuses to listen to reason." We sat in comfortable silence, a father and son who had faced down a different kind of enemy, not on a foreign battlefield, but on the manicured lawns of suburban America. And we had won. The flag rippled in the breeze, a testament not just to the country it represented, but to the quiet strength and unwavering principle of the man who refused to let anyone tear it down.